This has been the hardest time. The hardest time. Welcome to Pastorpedia. We're on the hardest time, I think, ever in my life, 55 years of church work, post-COVID. Welcome to Pastorpedia. What do we do now is our question. I'm with Jeff Bogue, Jim Brown. Thanks for coming, you guys.
It's good to be here.
Let's talk about the hardest time, but also what to do now. What are some next moves that the church should be making as we get over this flu season, COVID? It's been horrible.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it has been hardest time. I've said a few times, it's probably the hardest year of my life. I've had more painful moments in my life, but when you think about a long stretch and a massive weight in every area of your life, COVID's been huge. And every pastor I talk to, every church leader, every volunteer I talk to is worn out and exhausted by it. So prayerfully, this is lifting a little bit. And when we talk about what to do next, I think first we kind of have to acknowledge COVID is hyper local. And so like what Jim would do next, what I would do next would be very, very different. What the church a mile down the street would do next, depending on the neighborhood they're in, is very, very different. So I just want to qualify what we're saying in that way, that you really have to look at your local setting, your local attitudes and feelings about COVID, and even how it's affected your own church, and ask those questions in big ways. But in principle, I would say things like this. We need to have regathering strategies. So some of us have been open for a long time. I know many churches that are trying to open again for the first time on Easter, and thinking that through, not just how to have kind of like a first good service, but what would be my spring, summer regathering stratests? Am I going to contact everybody, etc.?
I would say, Jeff, anything that has community, that I think get people together, FaceTime together, put them in rooms together, make sure your small groups are gathering together. People have been isolated, they're hurting, they're broken, so we need to gather our people together and contextualize in the environment that you're in. But there will also be a large group of people that have checked out.
How do you get them again? How do you know who they are?
I don't think you do know exactly who everybody is, but you try to find out through people that were connected with them, friendships in the church, ministries that they served in, and just kind of walk through that list.
There's a book of the year for outreach was called Analog Church. I don't even know how to define analog, except it's arguing to get back to the personal, to the groups, and don't just be the stage church.
I think that's a big deal. I think one of the things COVID has done, people are burned out on screens, they're burned out on systems, they're burned out on calling and getting a computer instead of a human being. And I think going back and hand walking people through things, I think you have to think through what those things are. And I really agree with Jim. The first step, if you have not been open through most of COVID, your first step is not to get people back into a big room. Your first step is to get people back into community. People have to rediscover and re-socialize each other. And so if you think in terms of steps, even size, how do I, maybe with some people, start with a face-to-face meeting instead of a Zoom meeting? How do I help them get back into a life group or a small group or an ABF? How do I help them get into a mid-size, maybe social event kind of a group? And then how do I help them get back into regular weekend attendance?
Just connecting. It's connecting people, Jeff, in environments where they are together. And the truth is, Knute and I had a conversation. Jeff, we had this conversation too. You don't know who leaves the church, but it used to be that people would stop giving, then leave the church. And now people still give and have left the church. They're in this convenient mode. They like hiding behind a screen or not even watching screens, saying I am connected, but they're not connected. I also think family relationships, marital relationships, sibling relationships, all those relationships, they're frayed right now. So if we want to jump back into community, really go after those things too.
You guys are both strong leaders. What leadership lessons have you learned during COVID?
Some of the biggest things I've learned is be present. Like, you got to show up. You got to be bold. You're not going to find a decision that you can make that somehow pleases everybody. So you've got to somehow tune in to what the Lord's leading you to do, and then have the courage and the boldness to make those decisions and move forward. But
stay consistent too.
Stay consistent.
Yeah.
Don't bounce around.
Yeah.
Just say, this is our path. We're going with it.
Go with me. Come with us. This is where we're headed.
I think take surveys and let all the congregation decide.
That's a fantastically bad idea. Do not listen to the man in the middle. But I will say this. I learned a lot of leadership lessons around those things. I learned a lot of leadership lessons that I think 90% of leadership is showing up and being kind of on deck. But I also learned this. I learned a lot of pastoral lessons that more than in many years, people need me to know them, to love them, to chase them, to listen to them.
Say it.
And to say it. And to hear, when they say I'm upset with the church, I found that oftentimes that's not what's true. That's what comes out their mouth. But what they mean is, I'm scared, I'm frustrated, my life is in turmoil, and I need you to be my shepherd. And that's been a leadership lesson, that we have to get into the ground. You're not going to solve this with a program or a strategy, but you got to get into the ground, walk with people, pastor them. And the people who let you do that will reconnect. The people who won't reconnect.
Well, they say statistics are showing people smarter than me, or maybe for us.
That's a pretty, leave me off that list.
That 25% of the church won't return, and 25% of churches will close. And I believe that big piece of that is because of the isolation. So in regards to that, we need to respond to that. But leadership is crucial. And I would say on a personal level, for me, we kind of landed in two places. We're going to adjust or pivot, whatever word you want to use, but we're going to trust God. And more than ever, over this past year for me, I feel like, I know this sounds very common, but I feel like I had to hear from the Lord more than ever, because I couldn't listen to all the peripheral voices that were honestly mask divided. You used to have worship wars, now you have mask wars. And we have to listen to the Lord instead of the divisive voices.
I do think, and I was kidding, of course, about surveys, but I think a lot of our churches, our friends, might be in congregational churches where they still decide on so many things in a members' meeting. Nobody can make a good decision with more than 10 in the room, and you got to lead with love. And another question, a little bit we all referred to. How do you shepherd the people who backed away during COVID and you don't even know who they are? Is there anything to say to that?
Well, you check in, and whether it's a phone call. One of the things we did, initial steps of COVID, we contacted every single person in our directory, just checking on.
Who called them?
Every pastor did. And if you don't have pastors, you can get your deacons or your elders, just make a touch and see if they are still connected. Those calls meant the world to people, and that will tell you whether or not they are somewhat connected.
Yeah, we did the same thing. We went through our roster in all of our campuses. We tried to chase people down. We text, we email, we called, we followed through. And I'm sure if you ran into a random person from our church, they would say that they were missed, or but not because of lack of effort. Now, we also, let me say this, and I mean this lovingly, we also drew a conclusion to that. Because what we found is if people had not responded to us by a certain point, they were communicating to us.
Right.
That either we're fine and you don't need to chase us down, or we don't want to be connected. And that's all fine, but we just said it's not going to be for lack of our effort to do those
and
things.
Speak and minister and lead the people that show up.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't get consumed with those that haven't shown up. Check out, see if they're there, make concerted efforts, pray about it, but go with the ones you have and lead that bride.
And I really just want to agree with what Jim was saying earlier. You got to turn the news off, turn talk radio off, turn social media off. You have to dial into the Lord. no matter what decision you make, you're going to pay for it. That's the world we live in right now. You're going to pay for it. So that decision has to be made out of conviction. And that conviction has to be strong enough that the price you're going to pay for it is worth it, right?
Yeah.
And you can be convicted and act in love. I'm not saying get all harsh, but it really has to be your shepherd has to lead you through this, because there is no playbook to run to with it.
We started with a bookend. It's the hardest time ever. I've been in church 55 years as a leader or a coach. I think it's the hardest time also because of the way people disagree and the way Washington leads us, the two sides. Hang on to the Lord and do what's right in your eyes as you get perspective and as you go to Scripture and go to our Lord. You're with Pastor Pedia. I'm Knute Larson. Jeff Bogue, Jim Brown, with Thanksgiving to be with you. Good day.